Good afternoon. Welcome to the HDIAC Homeland Defense and Security webinar today. We'll be hearing from Ron Edmond on applying risk and crisis communication principles to our focus areas. Thank you, Ron.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time and allowing me the opportunity to share with you my view of risk and crisis communication as it pertains to your 8 focus areas. In looking at those 8 focus areas, every one of them has the potential to either have some sort of risk or crisis communication principles applied to them. So let's get started and see exactly what I'm talking about and how this may apply to you and some concepts that you may take with you and apply in your communication process as you continue to move forward in meeting your mission. So let's talk about the communication literacy gap. And I put this slide here, and I thought this picture was quite appropriate. A slice of apple, a slice of orange, a slice of apple, because that's where we are is sometimes in communicating with the public. We're trying to do a apples to oranges comparison. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that our technical folks, which would be you, typically speak in terms of quantitative objectivity. You're talking to a mass population, and you're viewing things from a macro level. Now, on the right-hand column, you see the public. They're communicating and listening from a qualitative standpoint. They're listening subjectively, and it's the community and about me. It's a much smaller area in which they are focused and which their concerns lie. So as we look at how we communicate, we look at risk and crisis and why they are different. Basically, it's unexpected. A crisis, especially a crisis, is unexpected, as evidenced by the recent shootings in Chattanooga at the Marine Corps base down there. There are high stakes potentially. There are high stakes in crises such as a tornado, a hurricane, or a severe weather event. It's urgent. Here again, either Chattanooga and or natural or man-made disaster can cause an urgent need for communication. Typically, there's a high level of public interest. There's a high level of anxiety, fear, and or concern about me. Remember, if we go back to our first slide, the me component that the public is looking at. And then there's a high potential for multinational or multi-agency involvement. As we have seen with whether it be a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, such as the shootings that we've had taken place over the last couple of 3 months here in the United States, all of those have multi-agency involvement, everywhere from the local police all the way up to White House interest, Department of Defense, Department of State. So you see there's a lot of agencies and people within these agencies involved in the communication aspect of an event. If you look at the other thing that makes crisis communication different is that we have to overcome psychological barriers. And if you look at these psychological barriers, the first thing you see is perception. There's a formula that goes along with this that I picked up many years ago from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Vincent Cavallo at the Center for Risk Communication at Columbia University. And that formula is R is equal to P. Now, what that means is reality is equal to perception and vice versa. Perception is equal to reality in the minds of the people that we're communicating with and to. So it's important that we understand that people's perception actually serve as filters for how they receive, internalize, synthesize, and apply that communication message to themselves and to their lives and to their community. Also, the environment in which we speak and refer to crises or risk is important. Are we speaking in context of the current environment that surrounds that incident that is occurring? The channels we use to communicate are also important. In this day and age with social media, the floodgates are open. So every imaginable channel of communication can be critical to getting your message out to the public, whether it be through the traditional press release and news conference, or whether it be through Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Flickr, YouTube, whatever it happens to be. All those channels of communication are essential to getting your message out, whether it be a crisis or a risk message to your public. And if you are in front of a camera, or if you're at a live meeting, or let's say you're looking at holding a community meeting in a public forum, such as in an auditorium or a gymnasium, where the people in the community are coming to hear about a risk on an environmental issue or whatever it may happen to be, your body language plays a big role in how people receive that communication as well. So as we think of these barriers to communication, we've also got to remember that these are essential in helping us prepare our messaging as we go forward as well. Now, we typically think we know what the public's reactions are going to be, but in reality, the public may not react as we anticipated that they might react. There are potential impacts. There could be complications in the tactical response, and the magnitude of the event may be larger than, and for an impact a greater number of people than what we first considered. And the other thing we tend to brush aside sometimes is that there are long-term mental health issues. Now, for those of you that have been around the block, so to speak, a couple of times, if you remember Vietnam War vets especially, that's when PTSD really probably has come to came to the forefront, and our willingness and knowledge of how to deal with that. We still have that same kind of issue in today's world in dealing with risk or crisis, is that PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, can be very impactful on our message and may cloud our messages to the public to which we're communicating. So sometimes we have to take that into or not sometimes, but all the time we need to take that in consideration as to how we craft that message, the channels of communication that we use, as well as the impact of that message on the public. Now, sometimes what this slide is saying is that the behavioral footprint will outsize the medical and physical impact, which means the impact may be greater than what we as a response agency and or as a medical community may be capable of dealing with. There could be, for instance, a lack of assistance to victims and their families. There may not be social networks that are established to help address these issues. Stigmatization, such as we have seen with in the past with the avian flu outbreak, with Ebola, stigmatization to various populations or ethnic groups. And as much as our audience wants us to return to normal, normal may or may not be possible, depending on the footprint of this particular incident. Now, as we look at some foundations for crisis and risk communication, there are four key things that impact our ability to communicate effectively with our public. First, one is called mental noise. And mental noise is everything that is happening today in our lives. All of you listening and participating in this webinar today are suffering from mental noise. While you're listening to this, some of you may be multitasking. You may be working on your computer, writing an email, or working on an Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint or whatever. You may be thinking about what you're going to do after work. You've got to pick up the kids at school. There's a football game. We've got to get to dance lessons or to soccer practice. Whatever. Those kinds of things impact our ability to hear messages that are crisis or risk oriented. In fact, there's a great commercial. If you'll Google YouTube and Google Invesco, I-N-V-E-S-C-O, and noise, there's a great commercial that really epitomizes this particular concept. It's a recent commercial, but it really drives home this point. So the point of noise is it blocks or filters our communication. So in essence, we need to have short, clear, concise messaging that encourages active listening. Secondly, we need to trust the source of information. So you and your agency or organization must be perceived as being a trustworthy and credible source if you want your public to accept your information. One of the key tenets in that trust determination is showing that you care, being empathetic to your audience. There's an old saying that goes, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So going back to that very first slide, putting this in the context of how would you like to hear and retain that information? How would you like to receive that information? Put yourself in the audience's shoes for that. The perceptions of risk. Risk, if it's perceived to be impactful to me and to my family, harmful to me and my family, then my frustration and outrage is going to be much higher, especially if it's something that is new, different, exotic, not in the norm from my paradigm. So what we as communicators need to look at is recognizing and responding to risk perception factors. And there's a great piece that is out there that you can Google called Outrage versus Hazard. It's by Dr. Vincent Cavello. And it explains those factors that influence how people perceive risk and how they respond to that risk as well. Then there's the negative dominance theory. And basically what that says or means is that people come to the table based on their life's experiences, based on their paradigm or where they are at this point in time in their lives. They come to the table, the risk communication and crisis communication table, with preconceived notions about X, whatever X happens to be, about whatever that situation happens to be. And so that negative dominance tends to distort that communication. So what we as communicators need to do is, as much as possible, communicate those messages in a positive manner. Now, if we look at message makeup, we see that there's a big difference in how people accept messages in a risk and crisis situation versus a typical day when we're receiving messages. From the visual, you'll see at risk and crisis communication is that 90% of your message is nonverbal, it's visual. So for those of you that are at a press conference or appearing on television or being uploaded or upstreamed, as it were, to the internet, then your body language, your facial expressions, your personal appearance is going to have a big impact on how your audience receives and internalizes that message. If you notice under both of these pie charts, the message is really only 10%. So it's important that our messages are impactful, they're short, they're to the point, they're very focused on the issue that the public are interested in, and not only that, on the information that they need, they, meaning the public, need to protect themselves and their families, maybe even their livestock, their pets, and their communities. So let's get into this just a little bit deeper, and let's get some definitions and some principles involved in risk and crisis communication. When we talk about risk communication, I'm talking particularly or specifically about preparatory communication, which means we are preparing the public to accept a risk of a certain on a certain issue, such as the siting of a nuclear power plant, or the building of a new highway through a community, or the impact of not getting vaccinations, whatever it happens to be. Risk communication is a science-based communication methodology that is designed to help the public to prepare should the risk become a reality. And it typically informs the community about the existence, the nature, the form, severity, or whether that risk is acceptable or not to that particular community. And that's another thing that we need to recognize, is knowing community norms and how that community may react or not to a particular message that we are sending out. Because the risk has the potential to affect health and safety, job security, individual self-esteem, their financial wealth, or it may impact natural resources or just the community as a whole in some way. Or it could be sensitive or controversial issues that are taking place within that community where risk needs to be explained to them, or shared with them, I should say. So as we look at risk communication and we pose it in a triangle, three important questions that we would ask or that we would need to address in the risk communication world would be: what is the issue, why your audience or your community members should be concerned, and what or how do you want your audience or stakeholders to react or think about this particular issue. As we look at how to develop these messages that we're sending out to answer those questions, what we want to look at is, if you go back to the pie chart, that 10% wedge that's out there, we want to keep that message short and focused so that the community can internalize information in pieces. There's an old saying that anyone can eat an elephant, but you can't eat an elephant at one time. You have to eat it in bits and pieces. So this is what I'm saying is that we're trying to feed them information in bits and pieces, allow them to internalize it so that they can act on that information in an appropriate manner. So one of the things that we can do is use this message mapping concept, which was developed by Dr. Vincent Cavello at the Center for Risk Communication, and talk to our communities using three key messages. What are the three most important things about this issue that you need them to retain and to act upon? So if you look at this message mapping template, one of the things that you need to recognize is that people can only internalize so much information at any one given point in time. They get overloaded because of the mental noise, the negative dominance, the lack of trust, those things that we talked about previously. So what we want to do is to make sure our messages are short, focused, and concise. And in essence, I'm asking you to speak in tweets. Yes, tweets. For those of you that don't tweet, then I'm asking you to speak in no more than 3 messages, 9 words per message, with a total of 27 words. If we count those words and those spaces within those words, that's going to be essentially a tweet. So 140 characters is what I'm asking that you think about doing as you deliver risk communication type messages. Sometimes the public doesn't necessarily believe the message that you're sending out, so they need some more supporting information. Why do you say that this is an issue? Why should I be concerned? What do you want me to do? I need some supporting facts. So if you can provide the public with supporting facts, at least 3, that helps them establish a baseline for our foundation for how they will or may not accept your particular message. So let's talk about the crisis communication aspect of this. Crisis communication is you're in the moment. It has happened. It's happening right now. A natural disaster, again, the shootings in Chattanooga last week, those sorts of things that you're in the moment, and it's a unique moment that are a surprise. It does pose a threat, and there's a very short response time. There's an ancient Chinese symbol there are 2 symbols that convey this particular message on crisis and risk communication. It's both a danger and an opportunity. And as you see by the quote there, in every crisis lies a seed of opportunity. So this is our opportunity during a crisis to provide the public some direction, some insight, some comfort as they try to deal with and respond to the crisis that may be impacting them and or their community. In a crisis, there are three basic questions that we need as communicators to be able to address. What happened? What's the occurrence? What's the impact? And what actions? What are we doing from the response, or what do you want me as a community member to do as a response to this particular crisis? Here again, the crisis message template is what I call the 2793, 3 messages, 9 words per message, no more than 27 words. Here again, a tweet. Using the supporting facts for those that may need more or additional information to help them cement their belief system, if you will, that will be important to them as well. Now let's talk about some of the components. We talked about trust earlier, so let's talk about the trust and how you can establish trust with your audience, especially dealing with crisis and risk-oriented issues. First of all, we know that people simplify their belief systems. And not only do they simplify, but they cling to their current beliefs. You know, it's always been something, this is my paradigm, this is what I believe, this is what my parents believe, my grandparents believe, this is my community beliefs. So we have that we have to overcome as well. We also know that people remember what is seen or they've previously experienced. And that's why our first message is so important to the public, is that it carries the most weight. It carries more weight than any of the other 2 messages. So if we are placing our messages, if I can go back up to this previous slide, if we place our most important message, number 1, that's going to get the heaviest weighted or the most critical information out in the beginning. The other thing you need to know is that the placement of your second most important message needs to be the last message that they hear. So your first important message goes in the first column, the second most important message goes in the third column, and the middle message is important, but it may not be as important to the audience as the first and the last message. So placement of your messages will be important as well. So let's move back down to our 4th bullet here, which talks about limited intake of information. 3 to 7 bytes of information. That information is a tweet. That's that 27 words that we're interested in making sure that you get out about, whether it happens to be something dealing with alternative energy sources, seaborne issues, cultural issues, and understanding the impact that culture has on our society, or as we look at what's happening in the Middle East today, for example, homeland security and defense issues, medical especially issues and weapons of mass destruction. All of these things are different and new to people for the most part in the general population. So they may or may not have a belief system, so it may be up to us to help mold this using their system, using crisis and risk communication principles to help them make important decisions that affect them and their families. So some barriers to communication are mixed messages from multiple experts. And in this day and age, and with the news formats running 24/7 and all the social media platforms, there's going to be a plethora of mixed messages from multiple experts from multiple fields coming in to weigh on your issue. Information that's released late can cause communication barriers. Communication that should have been released 3 days ago instead of today is really important. That you get that information out as soon as you possibly can. Paternalistic attitudes. A lot of the times the public has a sense that let's say the government or your agency is going to sweep in on the knight on the horse and save the day. And so they're going to sit back and wait for direction. Sometimes we have to provide them that direction or an action plan that they can take and apply to themselves in their situation so that they can help protect themselves and not just rely on us as government agencies to protect them. Not countering rumors and myths in real time. One of the first things that we need to do in a risk or crisis situation is to nip those rumors and or myths or urban legends in the bud as soon as we possibly can. Because what happens if we don't address rumors and myths is that eventually we will spend about 90 to 95% of our communication resources chasing those rumors and dispelling those rumors, and that only gives us a small amount of time to actually give our message, our real message that's important, to the public. Then, because we are associated with government agencies, then there's that always present public power struggles and confusion, and especially if it involves politicians, and if we're in an election year or whatever the situation happens to be, public power struggles always come to the forefront regardless of what the crisis or risk happen to be. There will be opposing views and mixed messages coming from those different experts, and not only that, from those power brokers that may have a stake in this situation. So what we need to think about in helping to establish that trust and credibility are these 4 basic building blocks. These are empathy and caring, honesty and openness, competence, expertise, and commitment and dedication. Here again, research performed by Dr. Cavello and the Center for Risk Communication. Ironically, this started with with doctors and patients' relationships, and that patients did not feel comfortable nor trust their physician when it came to dispensing medical information about their personal health. So as the Center for Risk Communication researched this issue of doctor-patient relationships, they found these 4 entities were very critical in patients being able to trust their physicians. Well, subsequently, they found that these same 4 critical issues applied to any low-trust, high-concern communication issue. And as you see, empathy and caring, which we spoke about earlier, takes the biggest chunk of our pie. So it goes back to what we said earlier. People don't know how much don't care how much you know until until you can express empathy and caring and show them that you care. So in order to open that window for them to listen to you, empathy and caring is a tenet that we all need to practice on and use in our risk and crisis communication messaging as we go forward. One of the things you need to know about empathy and caring, you either have it or you don't. There's no halfway being empathetic and caring. With the other 3 elements here on this chart, they have some degree of flexibility and they can fluctuate, but empathy and caring is a hard and fast yes or no, on and off type acceptance. So as we look at messaging, here's what the public's looking for. What we have in our messaging aspect is they want to gain facts. And our solution is that we need to have a good communication response plan and recovery efforts that we can articulate and communicate to our publics. They want to be empowered in the decision making. And when I say empowered, they want to have enough facts and information to be able to internalize it and make decisions on what is best for themselves and their families. And our main goal as communication in the risk and communication arena, I should say, is to decrease illness, death, and injury to that community. So what we want to do is get them that information so that they can help us when it comes to that decision making in avoiding areas, sealing off heating and air conditioning vents, sheltering in place, going to a shelter, whatever it happens to be that will help them and help us to decrease the impact on that community. They want to be involved as a participant, not just as a spectator. So we, in our communication, can help provide them with an action plan, things that they can do or should do or must do in order to protect themselves. They are going to be watching us and to ensure that resources are allocated appropriately. So our goal, one of our goals will be to avoid misallocation of limited resources, especially in a natural or even a man-made disaster, is that we get those resources out in that community in a timely and efficient manner. And they want to, their concern is recovering or getting to a more sense of well-being or normalcy. So as much as we can reduce rumors surrounding the recovery and response aspect to where we can get these folks back to what is normal, the better off that we're going to be and the more acceptance our messages are going to have with that public. Remember I said earlier that sometimes our messages, we think we understand what our messages are going to do and how the public's going to react to those messages, but sometimes they react differently. So we have to be prepared with plan A's, B's, and C's in case our primary plan of communication may not be as accepted by the public as we think. So having those alternate plans in place and guiding people, reducing rumors, and getting them to where that they feel more normal in a certain situation, the better off we're going to be. So as we look at what we can do is to assist with response and recovery efforts, decrease injury, death, and illness. Let's provide support not only to the community but to our responders, other organizations or agencies, advocacy groups, or governments that may be helping us with that response effort. Show the public that we are teaming with and working closely with these agencies to address or in some cases resolve these issues, maximize resources, advise decision makers, and reduce rumors and misinformation. In crisis and risk communication, our messages should be simple, timely, accurate, relevant, credible, and consistent. That's what is going to make our message or messages acceptable to the public. That 10% pie wedge that we saw earlier, that's what needs to be contained within that 10% pie wedge. CDC has a mantra that says, be first, be right, be credible. Simple messaging and timely messaging that we can get out as soon as we possibly can will be very critical in times of information needs during a crisis in your community. So, in closing, what I'd like to close with is that depending upon where you are within the event, you may use either risk or crisis or a combination of risk and crisis communication principles. If it's pre-event, you're going to most certainly want to look at messaging that prepares that public to accept a certain degree of risk. If you're in the moment, in the crisis, then that communication is very urgent. It's very important that people be able to get that information so that they can protect themselves and their family. In post-event, it may be a combination of, we need you to remain sheltered in place. We need you to remain at this shelter because the risk is still associated with this event is still prevalent in the community. We need to use the media. All aspects of communication are open channels: social media, print media, the electronic media. And in those media outlets and platforms, incorporate public education as much as we possibly can so the public will know what and how to protect themselves. We need to think about our partners and strategies with them, state, local, federal agencies, public health, law enforcement, local first responders, businesses and industry, all those partners that we have within our community that can help either make our communication response easier, or it can complicate it if we're not prepared to involve these folks and agencies as we prepare our communication. And lastly, keep calm and learn good risk communication skills. I think that's really important. If we're calm, then that sense of calmness will be evident in our communication patterns and in our messaging, and that will help keep our audiences and our publics calm as well. And lastly, as a resource, I would encourage you, if you have time on YouTube, this particular video is well worth its time in watching. It's about an hour and 45 minutes, and it provides some additional insight into crisis communication and understanding how people react to crisis and risk communication messages. I would definitely advise you to watch this. I think it would be a really great additional resource that you can use for ongoing self-development in the area of crisis and risk communication. And there are also two publications. One, Effective Crisis Communication, Moving from Crisis to Opportunity. It's a textbook that I used in teaching some of my students in the past couple of years, and it's a textbook, but it really opens your eyes and provides you some insight into how to move from crisis to opportunity. And then the same gentleman that is featured in the video has written a book called The Power of Communication Skills to Building Trust, Inspire Loyalty, and Lead Effectively. Those are two good publications that I could recommend and will recommend for you should you have a desire for additional development. And with that, I would like to thank you for taking your time today. And should you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. This is my contact information. I'll be glad to talk with you about risk and crisis communication, or if you have a particular issue that you would like some insight or some advice on, I would be glad to provide that to you. So with that said, again, thank you for taking your time, and if there are any questions, send them forward, and I will be glad to answer them for you.
Thank you very much, Ron, for sharing your expertise with us, and thank you all for coming to the HDIAC webinar series.